I stood at the podium, watching as flashbulbs illuminated the conference room. Reporters from every major news outlet leaned forward, microphones extended, hungry for details. Behind me, federal agents were escorting my former boss, Richard, out of the building in handcuffs. "Ms. Donovan, could you tell us what evidence led to today's arrests?" a reporter called out. Just 48 hours earlier, I had been clearing out my desk, fighting back tears of rage after Richard had fired me. Now I was the one holding all the power. "I'll answer that question," I said, my voice steady. "But first, let me tell you about a choice I made 3 days ago, a choice between keeping my job or keeping my integrity." As Richard's eyes met mine across the lobby, filled with hatred and disbelief, I smiled. He never thought I'd fight back. He never imagined I had been documenting everything for months. He certainly never expected me to bring his entire empire crumbling down. 3 months earlier, I was thriving at Pinnacle Financial Services. As senior account manager, I'd built a reputation for integrity and excellence over my 7 years with the company. My client portfolio had doubled in the past year alone, and I was on track for the promotion I'd been working toward since day one. That Monday morning began like any other. I arrived at the office early, coffee in hand, ready to tackle the week ahead. The sleek high-rise building that housed Pinnacle's headquarters had always filled me with a sense of pride. I'd come a long way from my humble beginnings, and this place represented everything I'd accomplished. The elevator doors opened to the 23rd floor, and I made my way to my office, nodding at colleagues as I passed. My phone buzzed with a message from Richard, our regional director and my direct supervisor. "Amelia, my office, 9 a.m. Important discussion about the Westfield account." I frowned. The Westfield Group was our newest client, a family-owned real estate development company looking to expand their portfolio. I'd been working closely with them for the past 2 months, helping structure financing for their latest project. Everything had been proceeding smoothly, or so I thought. At precisely 9, I knocked on Richard's door. "Come in," he called. Richard Blackwood had been with Pinnacle for 15 years. Tall, perpetually tanned, with carefully styled silver hair that matched his expensive suits, he exuded the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. I'd always admired his business acumen, even if his methods sometimes seemed aggressive. "Morning, Richard," I said, taking a seat across from his imposing desk. "Amelia." He nodded, not looking up from his computer. After a moment, he turned his attention to me, his expression unreadable. "The Westfield deal isn't going to meet our quarterly projections." I blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The numbers. They're too low. We need to restructure the deal." "We've already agreed to terms," I said carefully. "The contracts are ready for final signatures tomorrow." Richard leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "That's why I called you in. We need to make some adjustments before tomorrow's meeting." He slid a folder across the desk. I opened it to find a revised contract for the Westfield Group. As I scanned the document, my stomach tightened. The interest rates had been increased by 2 percentage points, several fee structures had been modified, and there were new early termination penalties that hadn't been part of our negotiations. "These weren't the terms we discussed with the client," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Richard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The market has shifted. These adjustments are necessary to meet our profit margins. But we can't just change the terms without consulting them. They've already approved the original agreement. That's why we need to handle this delicately." He leaned forward. "The changes are subtle enough that they might not notice immediately. By the time they do, they'll be too committed to back out." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. "You want me to present this as if nothing's changed?" "I want you to do your job," he said, his tone hardening. "Secure this deal with terms that benefit our company. That's what you're paid for." "I'm paid to create honest partnerships with our clients," I countered. "This isn't honest, Richard. It's deceptive at best, fraudulent at worst." His expression darkened. "Don't be so dramatic, Amelia. This is business. Everyone does it. I don't, I said firmly, closing the folder and sliding it back across the desk. And I won't start now. Think carefully about what you're saying. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You've worked hard for that promotion. Would be ashamed to throw it all away over one client's contract. The threat was clear. My pulse quickened, but I held his gaze. I need to prep for my afternoon meetings. Is there anything else? Richard's jaw tightened. Take the revised contract. Sleep on it. We'll talk tomorrow before the Westfield meeting. I took the folder, not trusting myself to speak further, and left his office. Back at my desk, I sat down heavily, trying to process what had just happened. In 7 years at Pinnacle, I'd never been asked to deceive a client. Our company's reputation was built on integrity and transparency. It was why clients like the Westfield Group chose us over our competitors. Had Richard done this before? Were other account managers altering contracts without clients' knowledge? The thought made me sick. I pulled out my phone and called my friend Sophia, who worked in legal. Hey, can you meet for lunch? I need to run something by you. Sure, she said. Everything okay? You sound stressed. I'll explain when I see you. At a small cafe 2 blocks from the office, I showed Sophia the revised contract. Jesus, she muttered after reviewing the changes. These terms are predatory. The Westfields would never agree to this if they knew. Exactly, I said. Richard wants me to slip these changes in without explaining them. He basically told me my promotion depends on it. Sophia pushed her salad away, her appetite gone. That's not just unethical, Amelia. It could be illegal. Intentionally misrepresenting contract terms is fraud. I know. But if I refuse, I'm pretty sure I can kiss my career at Pinnacle goodbye. And if you go along with it, you could be legally implicated. She leaned forward. Look, I've heard rumors about Richard cutting corners, but nothing this blatant. Something feels off. What should I do? Document everything, she advised. Forward any emails about this to your personal account. Take notes after every conversation. And whatever you do, don't sign anything that asks you to misrepresent terms to clients. I nodded, feeling slightly calmer with a plan in place. Thanks, Sophia. Be careful, she warned. Richard has powerful friends in the company. Back at the office, I spent the rest of the day distracted, weighing my options. That evening, I forwarded all emails regarding the Westfield account to my personal email and made detailed notes about my conversation with Richard. The next morning, I arrived early to prepare for the Westfield meeting. I'd decided to present the original contract we had negotiated, not Richard's revised version. If he wanted to make changes, he would have to do it himself, openly. At 8:30, Richard appeared at my office door. Amelia. A word before the meeting? I followed him to his office, my heart pounding. Have you reconsidered our discussion? He asked once the door was closed. I have, I replied evenly. And I've decided I can't present those revised terms without fully disclosing the changes to the client. Richard's face flushed with anger. This isn't a request, Amelia. It's a directive. I understand that, but I can't do what you're asking. It's unethical and potentially illegal. Everyone needs to compromise sometimes, he said, his voice dangerously soft. This is how business works at this level. Not my business, I replied. I build relationships with these clients based on trust. I won't betray that. Then perhaps you're not cut out for advancement at Pinnacle after all. He stood, signaling the end of our conversation. I'll handle the Westfield meeting myself. I returned to my office, hands shaking. I'd just sacrificed my promotion, possibly my entire career at Pinnacle, but I couldn't regret my decision. Some lines couldn't be crossed. At 10 a.m., I watched as the Westfield family, Father John, daughter Emma, and son Michael, were escorted to the conference room where Richard waited. I wasn't invited to attend. Later that afternoon, Richard stopped by my office. The Westfield signed the revised contract, he said smugly. They didn't bat an eye at the terms. That's how it's done. I said nothing, but doubt crept in. Had he disclosed the changes? Had they really accepted the new terms without question? Something didn't add up. My suspicions were confirmed 2 days later when Emma Westfield called me directly. Amelia, I'm looking at the executed contract, and some of these terms don't match what we discussed. There's a prepayment penalty clause we never agreed to, and the interest rate is 2 points higher. My blood ran cold. Emma, I'm so sorry. Those changes weren't part of our original agreement. Then how did they end up in the final contract? Her voice was tight with anger. I need to look into this and call you back, I managed. After hanging up, I sat frozen at my desk. Richard had gone through with it. He'd deceived the Westfields, and now they were discovering the truth. I needed to report this immediately. I went to HR and requested a meeting with Sarah, the director. Once in her office, I explained the situation in detail, showing her my documentation of the original and revised contracts. Sarah's face grew increasingly grave as I spoke. These are serious allegations, Amelia. I'll need to investigate this thoroughly. I understand. I just couldn't stay silent. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. In the meantime, please don't discuss this with anyone else. I felt a weight lift as I left her office. The right people would handle this now. Justice would be served. Or so I thought. The next morning, Richard called me into his office. Sarah from HR was already there, along with Jerome, the company's legal counsel. Close the door, Amelia, Richard said, his expression hard. I complied, a sense of dread building in my stomach. Ms. Donovan, Jerome began, it's come to our attention that you've been making serious allegations against Mr. Blackwood regarding the Westfield contract. They're not allegations, I replied. I showed Sarah the documentation yesterday. Yes, and we've reviewed those materials, Sarah said, not meeting my eyes. We've also spoken with Mr. Blackwood and examined all official records of the Westfield transaction. And? I prompted when she paused. And we found no evidence of any wrongdoing, Jerome stated flatly. The contract terms were fully disclosed to and accepted by the client. I stared at them in disbelief. That's impossible. I have copies of both versions. What you have, Richard interrupted, are drafts from the negotiation process. The final terms were agreed upon by all parties. The Westfields themselves dispute that, I argued. Emma Westfield called me directly. Which was highly inappropriate, Jerome cut in. You are not the account manager on that relationship anymore. Mr. Blackwood is handling the Westfield group personally now. Amelia, Sarah said, her voice softening with false sympathy, we're concerned about your conduct. Making false accusations against a superior, contacting clients outside proper channels, attempting to undermine company relationships. I felt like I'd stepped into some bizarre alternate reality. Are you serious right now? I'm trying to report actual fraud, and you're turning this around on me? That's enough, Richard said sharply. Given your behavior and clear inability to function as a team player, we've made the decision to terminate your employment, effective immediately. The room spun around me. You're firing me? For refusing to commit fraud? For insubordination and making unfounded accusations that could damage the company's reputation, Jerome corrected. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal items. Your access credentials have already been deactivated. I looked from face to face, searching for any sign of conscience or decency. There was none. You're making a mistake, I said quietly. All of you. That will be all, Ms. Donovan, Richard said dismissively. A security guard was waiting outside. In a daze, I followed him to my office, where I mechanically packed my photos, coffee mug, and a few personal items into a cardboard box. Colleagues watched in awkward silence as I was escorted to the elevator and out of the building. Standing on the sidewalk outside Pinnacle's gleaming tower, clutching my pathetic box of belongings. Rage and humiliation washed over me in equal measure. 7 years of dedication ended like this. Not only had they fired me, but they'd smeared my professional reputation in the process. I hailed a cab, gave my address, and sat in silence during the ride home. Once inside my apartment, I dropped the box on the floor and collapsed onto my couch, finally allowing the tears to come. After an hour of alternating between crying and staring blankly at the ceiling, I pulled myself together. This wasn't over. Richard and Pinnacle might think they'd silenced me, but they were wrong. I opened my laptop and accessed my personal email, where I'd forwarded all the documentation. There was the original Westfield contract, Richard's revised version, and my detailed notes of our conversations. I also had Emma Westfield's contact information. First, I called Emma and explained what had happened. "They fired you for refusing to deceive us?" she asked, horrified. "Yes, and now they're claiming the revised terms were properly disclosed to you." "Were they?" "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "Richard presented the contract as if it contained all the original terms we'd agreed to with you. He rushed us through the signing, saying it was exactly what we'd already reviewed. My father trusted him because of your prior work with us. Would you be willing to put that in writing? Or speak to authorities if necessary?" Without hesitation, she replied. "This is fraud, Amelia. We're going to need your help to get out of this contract." "You'll have it," I promised. After hanging up, I considered my next move. Pinnacle had made it clear they would protect Richard at all costs. Going back to HR or upper management would be pointless. I needed outside help. I called my college roommate, Megan, who now worked as an investigative reporter for the city's largest newspaper. "This is the kind of story I live for," she said after I explained everything. "Corporate fraud, whistleblower retaliation, it has all the elements." "But Amelia, are you sure you want to go public? Pinnacle could make your life difficult." "They already have," I replied grimly. "And I'm not the only victim here. How many other clients has Richard deceived? How many other employees has he pressured into unethical behavior?" "Good point. Let me do some digging before we move forward. If there's a pattern, that makes the story much stronger." "Thank you, Megan. In the meantime, I'm going to contact a lawyer." The next day, I met with Catherine Walsh, an attorney specializing in employment law and whistleblower cases. After reviewing my documentation, she was confident we had a strong case. "What they did is textbook retaliation," she explained. "Firing an employee for refusing to participate in illegal activity is explicitly prohibited by both state and federal law." "What about the fraud itself?" I asked. "That's potentially even more serious. If Richard has been systematically altering contracts after negotiation, that's wire fraud, mail fraud, possibly securities fraud depending on the nature of the transactions." "How do we proceed?" "Two tracks," Catherine said. "First, we file a wrongful termination suit against Pinnacle. Second, we report the fraudulent activity to the appropriate regulatory authorities, the SEC, the State Attorney General's office, and possibly the FBI. Will that be enough?" "Pinnacle has powerful lawyers. Which is why we need more evidence," she acknowledged. "Do you know anyone still inside who might help?" I thought of Sophia. "Maybe. Let me make a call." Sophia agreed to meet me for coffee that evening. When I told her what had happened, she was furious. "I can't believe they fired you for doing the right thing," she fumed. "Though actually, I can believe it. The culture has been getting more toxic lately." "Have you heard of Richard doing this with other clients?" She hesitated. "I'm not supposed to discuss this, but yes. There have been several contracts in the past year with last-minute changes that didn't go through proper legal review. When I've raised concerns, I've been told to streamline the process and not create bottlenecks. Would you be willing to provide information to my lawyer? Anonymously, if necessary?" "I'll do you one better," she said, lowering her voice. "I've been keeping my own records of questionable contracts. Not just Richards, there are a few other directors doing similar things. It seems to have become standard practice since the new CEO took over last year. My eyes widened. This goes beyond Richard? Way beyond. I think it's systemic. The pressure to hit quarterly targets has become so intense that people are cutting corners everywhere. Can you get me copies of those records? She nodded. Give me a couple of days. I need to be careful. True to her word, Sophia delivered a USB drive containing dozens of contracts with evidence of similar alterations. Not all were Richard's work, but he was by far the worst offender. The pattern was clear: negotiate favorable terms to win the business, then slip in changes before execution to boost profit margins. I immediately forwarded everything to Catherine and Megan. Catherine began preparing formal complaints to regulatory authorities, while Megan continued her investigation. 3 days after my termination, Megan called with exciting news. Amelia, you've opened Pandora's box. I've spoken with 5 former Pinnacle employees who described the exact same pattern of behavior. 2 were fired for objecting, just like you. And I've identified at least 7 clients who discovered deceptive terms in their contracts after signing. Will they go on record? 3 former employees and 2 clients have agreed so far. We're working on the others. My editor has greenlit the story, we're planning to publish next week. That's incredible, Megan. Thank you. Thank me after it runs, she cautioned. Pinnacle will try to stop us. They've already had their lawyers send threatening letters to the paper. Meanwhile, Catherine had filed my wrongful termination complaint and submitted evidence of fraud to the SEC and state authorities. The wheels of justice were turning, but I knew they turned slowly. What I didn't expect was how quickly things would escalate from there. The next morning, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Ms. Donovan? This is Special Agent Marcus Rivera with the FBI. We'd like to speak with you about Pinnacle Financial Services. My heart raced. Of course. What would you like to know? Quite a bit, actually. We've been investigating Pinnacle for the past 6 months as part of a larger financial fraud case. Your complaint has provided new evidence that could be crucial. Could you come to our office today? I agreed immediately. At the FBI field office, I spent 4 hours detailing everything I knew about Richard's practices and the broader culture at Pinnacle. Agent Rivera and his team were particularly interested in the pattern of contract manipulation. What you've described fits with other evidence we've gathered, he explained. We believe this goes beyond isolated incidents. There appears to be a coordinated effort to systematically defraud clients, possibly directed from the top. From the CEO? I asked, remembering what Sophia had told me. We can't comment on specific targets at this stage, he replied diplomatically. But your information is extremely valuable. We may need you to testify if this goes to trial. I'll do whatever it takes, I assured him. As I left the FBI office, I felt a sense of vindication beginning to replace my anger. The truth was coming out, and Richard, along with everyone who had enabled him, would face consequences. What I didn't realize was how swiftly those consequences would arrive. 2 days later, at 6 a.m., my phone exploded with notifications. Megan had texted, "Turn on the news now." I switched on the TV to see breaking news banners across the screen. FBI raids Pinnacle Financial Headquarters in fraud investigation. Live footage showed agents escorting people out of the building, including, to my astonishment, Richard himself, in handcuffs. The news anchor was explaining that the raid was part of an investigation into widespread financial fraud allegedly perpetrated against dozens of clients. My phone rang again. It was Catherine. "Are you watching this?" she asked without preamble. "Yes," I breathed. "I can't believe it's happening so fast." "The FBI must have already been building their case when you came forward," she explained. "Your evidence was probably the final piece they needed. They're moving quickly to prevent destruction of documents." Throughout the day, more details emerged. The FBI had arrested Richard and 3 other directors, as well as the CEO and CFO. Charges included wire fraud, securities fraud, and conspiracy. The scale of the alleged scheme was staggering, affecting hundreds of clients and involving tens of millions of dollars. By evening, Megan's newspaper had published their exposé online, prominently featuring my story and those of other whistleblowers. The article detailed how Pinnacle had systematically defrauded clients by altering contract terms and fired employees who objected. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone and email were flooded with messages from former colleagues, other Pinnacle clients, and even reporters seeking interviews. The story had gone national. The next morning, Agent Rivera called again. "Ms. Donovan, we'd like you to participate in a press conference this afternoon. The U.S. Attorney is announcing formal charges, and your perspective as a whistleblower would be valuable." "I'd be honored," I replied. Hours later, I found myself standing beside federal prosecutors as they detailed the charges against Pinnacle's leadership. When it was my turn to speak, I approached the podium with a strange sense of calm. Looking out at the sea of reporters, I spotted a familiar face in the back of the room. Richard, flanked by FBI agents, was being led through the lobby on his way to a hearing. Our eyes met briefly, his filled with hatred, mine with the quiet satisfaction of justice being served. As flashbulbs illuminated the room, I began my statement. 3 days ago, I was fired for refusing to participate in fraud. Today, I'm standing here because I chose integrity over career advancement. This isn't just about one corrupt executive or one defrauded client. It's about a culture that prioritizes profit over ethics, that punishes honesty and rewards deception. I paused, watching as Richard was led away in handcuffs. To anyone facing a similar choice, know this: doing the right thing may cost you in the short term, but the truth always finds its way to the surface. Always. In the weeks that followed, the full extent of Pinnacle's fraudulent practices came to light. Dozens of clients came forward with similar stories of deceptive contracts. The company's stock plummeted, and class action lawsuits mounted. Richard and the other executives faced up to 30 years in prison if convicted on all charges. The evidence against them was overwhelming, including emails explicitly directing employees to alter contracts without client knowledge. As for me, my wrongful termination suit was settled quickly and generously once Pinnacle's new leadership took over. Several competing firms offered me positions, drawn by my integrity rather than deterred by my whistleblower status. I eventually accepted a role as compliance director at a smaller, ethical firm, where I could help ensure that what happened at Pinnacle never occurred on my watch. 6 months after that fateful day when Richard fired me, I testified at his criminal trial. He sat at the defense table, diminished and gray, no longer the intimidating figure who had threatened my career. When asked why I had refused to alter the Westfield contract despite the professional risk, my answer was simple. Because some prices are too high to pay, even for success. I couldn't have lived with myself if I'd compromised my values for a promotion or to please a boss who had lost his moral compass. The jury convicted Richard on all counts. As he was led away to begin his 12-year sentence, I felt no glee, only a sense that balance had been restored. Emma Westfield called me that evening. "We just heard about the verdict," she said. "My family wanted me to thank you again. Your courage saved not just us but many others from being victimized." "I was just doing what anyone should do," I replied. "But most people don't," she pointed out. "Most people stay silent. You spoke up, and it cost you everything, until it didn't." She was right. In trying to punish me for my integrity, Richard had set in motion his own downfall. His attempt to silence me had given me a platform and a voice more powerful than I could have imagined. Sometimes, standing your ground in the moment of truth is all it takes to change everything. Not just for yourself, but for everyone whose lives you touch. As I hung up the phone, I smiled at the irony. Richard had fired me for refusing to forge client contracts, thinking he was ending my career. Instead, he had set me free, and sealed his own fate in the process.